Hi, I'm Stacey. Welcome to the kitchen of my old Kentucky home. Today on Bourbon and Biscuits, we're going to be making two long-standing Kentucky holiday traditions. We'll be doing an oyster dish and a bourbon milk punch. Let's get started. Here's what we'll need. 1 pint of shucked oysters with reserved liqueur, 2½ cups of oyster crackers, 3/4 cup of whipping cream, 3 tablespoons of butter, 1/2 tablespoon of hot sauce, 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 1/2 teaspoon of pepper. Well, you may be wondering why oysters are a tradition in landlocked Kentucky. I'm going to explain that more over a cocktail with Jessica. For now, just know that they've been around since about the 1800s in dressings, stuffings, soufflés, and casseroles. When I met my husband, his mother and aunt both do a version for the holidays, both Thanksgiving and Christmas, and the closest thing I can equate it to is like an oyster pie. So that's what I'm calling it with their recipe. So here we go. First thing we're gonna need is a pie plate, and I've already greased this. And we're gonna need our 2½ cups of oyster crackers, and we're just gonna take a handful and lather in the bottom. And even though I had measured this out to show what we needed, I think it's easier to work from the bottles on the Worcestershire and the hot sauce. So I'm just gonna simply douse a few drops over the oysters. And I'm using, since this is for the holidays, I'm using a very nice Pappy Van Winkle line of hot sauce. Put a little of that on there. And we'll salt them a little bit, and some fresh cracked pepper. Now for the oysters, you can layer them in whole. I like to break them in pieces so you don't get one big whole oyster in a bite, although I'm sure a lot of people would like that. So I'm just kind of break these up and layer them over. Okay, that looks like a pretty good layer. So now I'm going to take another layer of this, and I'm just going to, on this layer, just kind of give them a little squeezing, get a little crumbs going there. I like the fullness in a bite, but we'll do this layer just kind of broken up a little bit there. Okay, and again, back to another couple of squirts of the Worcestershire and the hot sauce. And you can do this to your own heat level or what your family or friends' preference is as well. We like it pretty spicy in the Shepherd Yates household. Okay, now we're gonna take our cream and our reserved liqueur from the oysters. It's about, again, 1/4 of a cup of the liqueur and 3/4 of a cup of cream. I'm gonna mix this around. We're also gonna add a little more of these two items to this sauce. And we'll salt that a little bit. So we're gonna simply pour this over our dish. Then we're gonna add another layer of oysters. Okay, now we're gonna add our final layer, really our topping. We'll take a couple more of our oyster crackers and give them a little crunch there. And then I like to, the way this comes out, I like to keep some whole. Just put those on top. And then we've got our butter that's been melted. We'll just pour that over those crackers. One last little pinch of salt and a nice little sprinkling of the ground black pepper. And we're gonna stick this in a 350-degree oven for 40 minutes. While it cooks, let's go watch Jessica make some bourbon milk punch.
Today I'm gonna make a bourbon milk punch. This is a holiday classic, a lot like eggnog, but it's gonna be a lot simpler and easier to put together. So what we're gonna use is whole milk, vanilla extract, powdered sugar, nutmeg for our garnish, and Kentucky bourbon, of course. So let's get started. I've already got my cocktail shaker with ice in it, and we're gonna be using 1 cup of milk, and if you're making a larger batch of this, you could kind of do it all together to make it more of a punch style, and you're gonna use 1 part bourbon to 4 parts milk. So we've got a cup of milk in here. I'm gonna use 2 ounces of Old Forester bourbon. And then we're gonna do 1 teaspoon of powdered sugar. Oops. This doesn't have to be exactly precise since we're just making it in a cocktail. If you want it a little sweeter, you could do a little more powdered sugar. And I'm also going to do just about 1/4 of a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And when we shake cocktails, we always typically do fruit juice, or if you're using anything with cream or milk. So we're gonna give this a good shake in our cocktail shaker. This is one that you definitely want nice and cold, and it's nice if you get some of those like ice flakes in there too. And if you're doing a larger batch, and if you had some leftover, you can actually put it in the freezer. It won't freeze all the way, and it'll get a little bit slushy. All right, so we're just going to strain this, whoops, got frothy there, into our glass, and garnish it with a little bit of nutmeg. So much easier than making eggnog. All right, and that's all there is to it. It's a classic bourbon milk punch.
Jessica, I love this milk punch. You have totally riffed my aunt's recipe for this.
You know, I didn't grow up drinking these, but it really is delicious and maybe like 10 times easier than making eggnog.
So much
but it really
easier
has
than
the same kind of festive feel. So I like it.
It does. And when I used to drink it at my aunt's, I thought it was eggnog for a long time. So when then
Were you surprised when you had eggnog?
Like, full cream effect, right? But no, it's a lot easier and a lot easier to batch and save.
Yeah, I do want to try it with it being frozen for a little bit and have a kind of a slushy, milkshakey feel to it too.
Really, really good. And does your family do oysters for the holidays?
So my grandma always did oyster dressing.
Okay.
So she did it with cornbread and oysters, and we do that on the side, especially for Thanksgiving. But we didn't really do like the oyster souffle or the scalloped oysters like you did.
So same. So I grew up having oyster dressing, and it wasn't until I married my husband that I got treated to what his family just calls the oysters. So his mom makes them, his aunt, for both Thanksgiving and Christmas. And what I said earlier about the oyster pie, just because I couldn't think of what to call it, actually while you were making this, I was looking at some of those old recipe books that I have, like that early 1900s, and most of the recipes, whether dressings, croquettes, fried, all that, it said scalloped oysters. So that's probably more what it is. So oyster pie, scalloped oysters, whatever.
The oysters.
Right. And so I said I would talk about why, even though Kentucky and Louisville are landlocked on the Ohio River, why oysters were such a thing before, say, you could get them overnight on UPS.
Right, it's really interesting because we talk about our seafood being good because we can get it so quickly, but this oyster kind of dish has been around for a really long time.
And you would see like oysters stacked up downtown in old black and white pictures.
I've seen those pictures,
right?
I love
With
it.
the
Yeah, it looks so fancy.
Oh, very fancy. Well, so in the history books that I read, it was because there were so many settlers from the coast, the East Coast, and coming over from like Virginia, they loved them and they would get them any way they could on stagecoach, basically, packed down in ice in barrels, like bourbon barrels, of course. And when the railroad system was put in, they could get them a little easier, but it was still pretty hard and pretty expensive. So that's why it wasn't necessarily a daily dish, but they reserved it for those festive occasions, like the holidays.
Occasions. You're trying to show off if you're hosting a dinner party, that kind of thing.
That's right. Yeah. So I just think that's neat that we, could have that any time of the year now, but we still, certainly in our family, we think of the oysters during the
special
holidays.
occasion. Yeah,
right.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's
so
cool.
Another great traditional episode.
Yeah. Well, cheers to the holidays and another great year, and we'll see you next time on Bourbon
and Biscuits.
Cheers.
Cheers.